5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Are we privileged or what? We've got the director of NASA, in fact lots of different directorships that I can't remember all because I'm not a rocket scientist, but he is. Sorry, I keep doing those ones. So, sorry about the spelling again. I'm an activities director, not a NASA one. I missed out an A, but I got a pretty picture. So Russell Romnella. Okay, that was your activity to spot the error. And so we're very excited to have you here, sir. And also, we'll hear a little from Jim Suma, who actually worked at NASA too. So if you could please introduce yourself.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm happy to be here. As she said, my name is Russell Romnella. I worked out on the Space Center for about 32, 33 years. I started, and I retired 10 years ago. So I'll tell you just a real quick story. I retired 10 years ago. I never had any children in my life. About 9 years ago, I met somebody who's a little younger than me, but not a whole lot younger, 9 years younger than me. And she never had any children. And we decided 4 years ago that we were going to try to have a baby. And we went to a lot of the clinics and the doctors, and they said, you're too old, you're too old, you're too old. And her niece actually wrote a letter to a doctor in Orlando and told him our story of who we were. She was a principal for 30 years, and I worked out at the Space Center for 30 years. And the doctor said, come on, let me talk to you. And we went on over, and he said, we'll give it a try. So I now have a 3-year-old.
No.
And it worked so well that after she had the first baby, the doctor said, if you guys want to do this again, I'll support it. So she had the first baby at 53.
Wow.
She had the second baby at 55.
Oh.
So we got 2 little girls. I don't have a picture of them there. I have them on my phone. I can send you all a picture later. So that's what, so that's what I do in my retirement. Besides some of this, I enjoy going out and talking to people about what's going on within NASA. What the lecture will do is give you a little bit of history, a little bit about where NASA is today, and what's coming in the future. As soon as our rocket gets operational in the next year, we'll start to see them out at the Kennedy Space Center. As I said, up to 2 times as powerful as the Saturn V rocket. And what's made them amazing and what has made SpaceX amazing is reusability. They come back and they land and they reuse them again. You don't dump everything in the ocean. You come back and you reuse the same motors. You reuse the same fairings. You reuse the same launch vehicles. Over 30 engines on takeoff. If one of the engines fails, they can still make it to orbit and have a successful mission. This was a big deal, separation between the first stage and the second stage. So this is all working. NASA is going to rely on these heavy lift launch vehicles to help us go back to the moon, especially SpaceX, as well as what's happening with Blue Origins, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. I'll keep going in the interest of time here. All right, we'll talk about this guy next. So here's another billionaire. When you order Amazon, you got the package at your front door. You're helping him actually create a program called Blue Origins. It's out on the Space Center, it's in Texas, and it's also in Seattle. And he is also building a very large rocket, almost as powerful as a Saturn V rocket. And he's like the 3rd or 4th richest person in the world, Jeff Bezos. And here he is. These are the rockets. So the Falcon 9 and the Falcon Heavy are the rockets that we hear once a week that are going off all the time. His rockets are out here, the New Glenn, 2-stage Street and 3-stage, compared to the old rockets that we had, the Ariane. Now this is out on the Space Center. This is a facility that's out there. And it's a huge facility. Thousands of people actually working out there, and they are building the rocket there, and they're going to start doing the launches from the Kennedy Space Center area in the not too distant future. The first time I met Neil Armstrong, I was a director of space station, and I got a call from the person that worked public relations and said, Neil Armstrong was down in the lobby of my building. It's a space station processing facility. Would I like to come down and meet him? Yeah, I'd like to come down and meet him. I didn't want to wait for the elevator. So I get, it's 4 stories, I get in the stairway and I run down the stairs, and there's a young engineer who I just hired who was coming up. His name was Kirk. And I said, Kirk, come with me, this is going to be very cool. He didn't know where he was going. So we go down, and there's Neil Armstrong, and I go up, and he's a little standoffish, because you can imagine what he went through in his life. When he was alive, his signature was the most expensive signature of anybody alive, over $1,000 just by him signing it. His barber saved his hair, and he tried to sell it on eBay. Okay, this is what he went through in his life. But I went up, I said, hi, I'm Russell Romnella, welcome to the Space Station Processing Facility. He goes, hi, thank you for having me, and this is his daughter. And I said, this is Kirk, and Kirk said, hi, I'm Kirk. So we're talking, and I am just on cloud 9. I got to meet Neil Armstrong, I am so excited. And I had a great conversation with him. I told him everything happening in the building, and we get done, we leave. I get in the elevator now with Kirk to go back up, and I said, Kirk, was that the most amazing experience? And he goes, yeah, it was good. Who was it?
Oh.
And I said, Kirk, that was Neil Armstrong. He goes, no, it wasn't. I said, Kirk, that was Neil Armstrong. He goes, no, it wasn't. I said, Kirk, it was Neil Armstrong. He goes, he didn't look like the picture. I said, because the picture's from 1969. He was 80 years old at the time. So he didn't even know he met Neil Armstrong. Going on today. I think us going to Mars, which is going to happen, going back to the moon, are things that are going to capture that same kind of imagination again across the country. One of the last shuttle missions, the shuttle was out on the pad, one of the last missions to launch, about 11 years ago. Now the shuttles were expensive. They were not cheap to launch. When I first started out there, it was at the very beginning of the shuttle program. We thought we were going to turn them around like an airplane. You're going to be able to launch them in a few days, turn them around. Never happened. Very expensive to maintain, very expensive to get ready to launch. There was over 20,000 unique tiles on the shuttle. You had to check every one of those tiles. After every mission, you had to take the engines off and refurbish the engines after every mission. It was very, very expensive. And NASA's budget is, it's about 17 or 18 billion dollars a year, which is a lot of money, but put it in perspective. For every dollar you spend in taxes, about a third of a penny goes to NASA. So it's not that NASA, if you took NASA away and spent that money somewhere else, it ain't going to fix anything else, and you're going to give away a lot of stuff. So it's not much of an investment when you look at it that way. But the shuttle, we weren't going to get any more money. If we wanted to go to back to the moon, if we wanted to develop different kind of rockets and go to Mars, we were going to have to retire the space shuttle and move on. And as you know, we lost 2 space shuttles, right? Columbia and Challenger. We lost 14 astronauts. The space shuttle was never considered, quote, an operational vehicle. If you had a problem on liftoff, you're going to lose the crew. That's what happened to Challenger. There was no escape pod. They tried to put something in after Challenger, but if you had a bad day, you're going to lose the crew. You will never see any country launch another rocket without the ability to separate the crew from the rest of the rocket. Every rocket we launch today with people on it has, they're called different things, but it's basically an escape pod that'll fire. Even if the rocket's blowing up on the launch pad below them, it'll take them away and land them safely. The shuttle didn't have that. But the last few years of the space shuttle program, we built the International Space Station. Here are 2 astronauts out working, assembling it. That was what I did for the last part of the space station. Pieces would come from all over the world. They would come from Canada, they would come from Russia, they would come from Europe, different countries in Europe, they would come from Japan. We would test them out on the Space Center, we'd put them in the shuttle, launch them, and they would get launched, and then the astronauts would assemble them on orbit. It took over 20 launches to put the space station together. The space station is on orbit now. There's actually a picture of Atlantis docked to the space station as we were assembling it. To give you an idea, the space station is bigger than a football field in the end zone. It weighs over 1 million pounds. It's on orbit now. You actually can go out at night occasionally and see it go overhead. It's about the size of a 5-bedroom, 3-bath house, to give you an idea how big it is. The solar arrays generate electricity. All the astronauts live and work in the cylinders here, the habitable volume. And that's the Japanese laboratory, Cabot. That's the European laboratory. The US laboratory is right there. That's the Russian side of the space station. Space station sees 16 sunrises and sunsets every day. It's traveling around the Earth at 17,500 miles per hour. These are all the countries that participated in the International Space Station. There's a picture from one of the last missions of the space station. This was taken as by the shuttle as it was departing. That's what it looks like today. Canada provided the robotic arm and hand that actually allows you to do maintenance on the space station without astronauts doing spacewalks. And then these are the launch vehicles. We retired the shuttle. The Soyuz is still launching to the space station. The Russians are still participating in part of it for the next few years. European Space Agency and the Japanese Space Agency have rockets that bring up supplies. And in this country, SpaceX and Orbital bring up people and supplies. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. With spacecraft development is like we haven't seen since the 1950s or 60s. And this guy's having a lot to do with it. So whatever you think of him politically, he's a billionaire, and he didn't just sit on his money and sail around the world. He did SpaceX, the Boring Company. He's doing all kind of battery technology. SpaceX is changed the way humans are getting to space. He is. This was #1 worth. I don't know if he's still the richest man in the world, but he was way up there. So this Tesla stock has dropped, and I think it's affected him a little bit.
Do you know what his IQ was?
I don't know, but it was in the genius category.
What a surprise.
Yeah, and his mom was also a genius, and he suffered from Asperger's syndrome a little bit, and so some of those people, it's borderline, right? You can be incredibly intelligent, but you've got some challenges with social skills, and I would put him in that category. He's pretty smart, but he does have some challenges with some of the social skills, but he's amazing. So what has that done for us? Here is the cost per pound to get into low Earth orbit. So to put it in perspective, the space shuttle is up here. It's about $51,000 a pound to get it to low Earth orbit. Saturn V rocket was less than that. The space shuttle was very expensive. You come out here and you see what's happening with the Falcon rocket and where it is, and the new Starship that he's developing, $200 a pound. So think about that. We went from $50,000 a pound, and we're about to go down to $200 a pound. And his SpaceX vehicles are somewhere about $1,000 to $2,000 or $3,000 a pound. It has revolutionized getting stuff into space. For the longest time, when we were out there in the Space Center, we used to have commercial rockets launching from the Air Force Base, and then they all left. The only rockets that were launching out there were Department of Defense rockets, and those had to use U.S. rocket capability. All the commercial satellites, all that stuff, they left the United States because we were too expensive. They didn't do it anymore. They were either launching it in French Guiana with the Europeans, or it was in China or Japan. All that work's come back to this country. The reason there's a rocket launch every week, now, because of SpaceX and because of what's going on and how cheap it is. All that work, all those millions and billions of dollars have come back to this country instead of overseas launching the rockets. And SpaceX revolutionized it. Early enough, like if we discovered it and it's a week away, we got a problem. But we have now cataloged so many items. Now the items that we've cataloged are in our solar system. They're in the asteroid belt, they're around the Earth, they're in orbit around the sun. If there was an object to come in from outside of our solar system, which actually happened about 1.5 years ago, if there was an object to come in from outside the solar system, if we detected it early enough, we would be able to have an effect on it. If we detected it late enough, we wouldn't be able to do anything about it. But we can do stuff about the ones that we know about.
Has an asteroid come between the Earth In the moon?
Absolutely.
It happens all the time,
Yep.
which is scary. When
Happens
I read
all the
these
time.
stories, yeah.
Happens all. There are asteroids that come between our geosynchronous satellites, which is 23,000 miles up, and the Earth.
But that asteroid, what was it called? Dark, or I forgot what the name it was when they tried to deflect it just to what you were just showing now.
Yeah.
But now, so it sounded like it broke it up, and now there's like a trailing.
No, it just bumped it, and there was a few little pieces that came off, but it took a sample.
But it did move the trajectory a little bit.
But not in a negative way. So
yeah, because that's scary.
Yeah.
Because now all of a sudden you bump it
That's
because
true.
it's going to come back as a boomerang.
And there's actually an asteroid called Apophis, and I don't have the exact date, but it's going to come closer than our geosynchronous satellites, and it's going to be Friday the 13th.
Yeah, it's in 2 years, I think.
Yeah, it's coming up in a couple of years. But at first, when they discovered it, they said, "Uh-oh, this could be a problem." And then, as they refined its orbit, they actually know where it's going to go, and they don't have a concern about it now. But this stuff happens, and it's pretty cool that we can do something about it, and we got to pay attention. On its axis every day, and if you're on the equator, you're actually traveling about 1,000 miles per hour just by standing on the equator, because you're going this far around every day. Now, if you're at one of the poles, you're not going very far. You're just going like that, pretty slow. But if you're on the equator, you're going 1,000 miles per hour. The closer you are to the equator, the more of a boost that rocket gets. It's already going 1,000 miles per hour when it lifts up into space. So you want to launch close to the equator as possible. That's why it was chosen. We're going to go back in time here. May 5th, 1961. The Soviet Union was kicking our butt, right? They put the first satellite in orbit. They put the first dog in orbit. They put the first human with Yuri Gagarin in orbit. They were kicking our butt, and the United States was catching up. And at the time, it was a space race. And both the Soviet Union and the United States understood the value of having the world see what was happening. And they were winning. And because it was really an assessment of the political system, of communism versus capitalism. You know, it was really an assessment of which country was going to be better. So both countries were investing, and the United States was having a rough start. But here we are, May 5th, 1961. We're finally getting our act together. Alan Shepard went up into space, first American astronaut in space. But look at what's interesting here. When Alan Shepard went up, orbit's 0. He didn't even go around the Earth. He went up and came back down, kind of a suborbital flight. He was only in space for 15 minutes. Okay? So keep that in mind. May 5th, we had 15 minutes of spaceflight experience. 20 days later, John F. Kennedy gets up in front of a joint session of Congress and challenges this nation to land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth by the end of the decade. We had 15 minutes of spaceflight experience. People thought he was nuts. People thought we're not going to be able to do this by the end of the decade. And so the space race is on. What the United States was saying, yeah, that other stuff the Soviet Union did was good, but the prize is the moon. Whoever gets to the moon first is going to win the race. So we got challenged. These guys actually did it. Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, Michael Collins there in the middle. The third emperor of the Ming Dynasty, look at when he was born, 1360 to 1424. Now keep that in mind. Christopher Columbus came to America in 1492, right? So here we are, the third emperor of the Ming Dynasty, as part of his desire to expand Chinese influence around the region, and at that time they fought around the world, they built a fleet of ships, and he directed them to take these ships to increase trade, to explore, and to demonstrate to the world how amazing China was at the time. And they did. They built these amazing ships. Remember, this is 100 years before Christopher Columbus crossed the Atlantic. So I'll give you an example of one of the giant treasure ships. Here's one of the giant treasure ships that China had built. Now compare it to the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria down there. So what happened? Why didn't China do the exploration and travel the world? Well, what happened? That emperor died. The next emperor came to power and said, we don't like anything that other guy was doing, just like today. And I'm going to change it. And as a matter of fact, everybody has to burn their ships. He made it illegal have any ships with more than one mast. They had to burn all their treasure ships, and China went basically into lockdown for hundreds of years. And meanwhile, the rest of the world and Europe made the discoveries and went around the world and colonized around the world. So the message there is that a country needs to have forward vision. They need to be reaching for things that are hard things to do. They need to have things that inspire. I talked to a couple of people about the fact that I go out to a lot of schools, and I talk to elementary schools, high schools, and colleges. And this is something, space exploration is something that it's easy to get kids excited about. They want to go home and learn. They want to go home and study it. And it was something that influenced me. I was not a good student. I got kicked out of high school more than once. I didn't want to go to college. And it took a while, and I finally realized space was something I was interested in. I was interested since I was a little kid. I bought my first telescope when I was 16 years old. I mowed lawns all summer. I bought a $600 telescope, which at the time cost more than my car cost. And so I didn't know what to do after high school, and I started talking to a neighbor, and he said, "What do you like?" I said, "I've always been interested in space." He goes, "There you go." And through a series of lucky things, I ended up getting an internship at NASA, and I started at NASA in 1982, and I got hired on permanently after I graduated in 84, and I had an amazing career. I traveled all over the world. I was the director of Space Station for over 10 years. I was the associate center director, and I was the director of safety and mission assurance the last couple of years of my career. So I was very fortunate, but it is something that I think makes a difference and can inspire people. Here's a great shot of Florida. You see the East Coast. You see the land that sticks out right there. You all know that's Cape Canaveral. Well, it was chosen in the 40s to launch rockets. And it was chosen for three primary reasons. One, because we have weather that's pretty good year-round. Two, because when a rocket launches, we generally will launch it out over the ocean, and if it has a bad day, it's going to fall in the ocean and not on populated areas. And for the third reason is because Florida is close to the equator. Yep.
And let me tell you something, guys. Russell speaks to his last crowd was 2,000 people, and he does this all volunteer.
That's
So, yes. Have you got more for us? Can you come back?
Oh, sure, invite me back. I got different presentations.
Yay! Do we want him back? Yay!
Well, thank you for having me.